All right, so that just you may have seen the recording from last week on the home page or on the help screen of campus. This one will be included there as well for your viewing and refreshing as needed, because we are about to enter contract season. For some of you who have already gone live. So without much further ado, so we can try and get through everything. This time we will be focusing on the contract side of things, the setup of the contract side, things you have to do to get what the parents see where you need them to be. There's a few other items you have to take care of before you go live with the contract besides the back end we talked about last week. And I'll be focusing on that. So looking at like your profiles in the contract, your sections, controls, testing the contract, overrides, and stuff like that. So you should be able to see my screen. I got confirmation from colleagues here that that looks good on their end. If it's not on your end, it may be an internet issue. I'm not too sure. But for sure in the recording will be available. If you're having trouble viewing that, I apologize. So I'm looking at the home screen right now of my contract as an administrator. And you can see if this is your first time working in contracts, maybe you're not familiar, but those of you that are doing a year-to-year kind of refresher, you will remember that, sorry, as an administrator, you do see the content that you edit, and you also see as it displays. So you can modify your home screen. That's just a welcome screen for you to let your parents know what's going on here. And then you're also able to see the students that are tied to the household that is doing the contract. One thing to remember or to be aware of is the students that show, the students that are tied to the household that is enabled to do the contract. Last week, Fahad mentioned on the settings screen, you can have the household set to primary only, billing only, and stuff like that. So if you have any such settings, only the household that is specified would be able to see the students specified down below. Okay. In just a moment, I need to disable something here because my phone is going off. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So, yes, you will need to specify the household. If it's primary only or billing only, only they would see their students. If you have a secondary and primary situation and you specify a secondary household, you will want to provide a link to the secondary contract to the parents so that they can also see the students and do a contract for them. So those are things for the home screen. It's a very simple screen, not much. You're just doing the text, really. And then the rest of this comes from the settings you'd have done in the previous step, for example. All right, then the parts that will be probably more involved, I get to that right away, is the profiles. Now, what are profiles? Profiles allow you to have multiple contracts within a single contract. Now, you do want to have as few profiles as possible because you don't want to have to maintain too many versions of a contract. In recent years, of course, we have had an update where you can copy contracts and have multiple different ones, but that's not as efficient as just having multiple profiles where you can distinguish between, say, grade levels. As you can see, I have PK to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8. Profiles allow you to have different, say, tuition levels or different fee structures for people within your same school, but then they have, a common example is boarding versus day scholars. You may have extra fees for boarders. The main reason to have separate profiles is if you have different tuition levels and stuff like that. Otherwise, if it's all the same across the board, then you would not have any need to have separate profiles. So as you're going through and getting ready to do your contract, many of you who are doing year to year, when you copied your contract, you already had your profile set. You could add new ones if you need to. Adding a profile is just as simple as clicking new. But then the thing to be aware of is what drives the profile is your data in the system. You have to create filters. Now, we could spend all day talking about filters because that's a monster on its own, but excuse me, you have to have filters to create your profiles. The profiles are, for example, if I have to look for grades 5 through 6, I'll specify that this is for grade 5, grade level must be equals to 5 or 6, or same thing, grade level equals 9 or 10. Whatever the breakdown of my contract is, that is how I build my filters so that I can create and drive my profiles using my filters that I create in campus. Now, an important thing to remember about your profiles is each student must only fit within one profile. That is very important because if a student qualifies for multiple profiles, the contract doesn't work out for them. It won't know which version of the contract to load, and you end up having a blank contract for a student. So you must be very meticulous when you are creating your filters so that a student only fits within a single profile for each contract application. Like I said, the common examples are grade levels. Other examples are day scholars versus boarders. Other examples are international versus domestic. Whatever your levels are for each school, some have more complex breakdowns than that. Whatever it is, you just have to make sure your filters are built to accurately account for that. On the profile screen, you also have other functionalities besides the filter and coming up with the breakdown of your school profiles. It also allows you to see just some data, the way your data is structured right now, how your profiles are broken down. It tells you enrolled students unaccounted for. Pretty much it's telling you that, okay, I have so many enrolled students in the system, but based on the profiles I've built, there are some people that don't fit in any one of these filters. Very commonly, you'll have, because contracts are built to enroll students for the coming year, very commonly you'll have like grade 12s. Your current year grade 12s maybe not fitting in a profile. So in that number, it doesn't have to be 0. It all comes down to what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe you have enrolled students that are, excuse me, not returning. If they're marked as not returning already before the contract season comes around, they also may not be matching the profile. So it's very possible that you'll have that number specified or populated. The more common thing we see is that maybe graduating students, current grade 12s will be graduating at the end of the year, do not fit in any profile, which in theory is the right way to do things. All right, so, but if you have people that are coming back not fitting in a profile, then you know you have a problem. So it allows you to see, I can just click that number to see, okay, who doesn't fit in any profile. So I can see, oh, this one, Keith Nyasan or Aaron Joe, he's not graduating, why doesn't he fit in a filter? Then I can evaluate my filters and make sure that, okay, I probably did my filter a little wrong, so he doesn't fit in, or his data is not up to date and accurate, that's why he doesn't fit in a filter. Then I can make those necessary adjustments. All right. Then we also have, it tells you as well, the students matching multiple profiles, because like I said, each student should only fit within a single profile. Because if that is not the case, then you have some challenges with your contract. They'll come in, they'll log in, and they won't see any text, and you wonder what's going on. If they fit multiple profiles, you'll have that problem. So that number should always be 0. All right, then you have students in the system. For parents to be able to come through and do the contract, the parents must have a login tied to the household that is tied to the student, right? So if you have a bunch of households, this is our test database, this is not anybody's database, so don't worry. We have a bunch of records in there that are not tied to households, probably not even tied to households as logins, or maybe not even tied to households. So, but as an active school, you should not have a scenario where you have enrolled students that don't have households that don't have logins, especially if you're planning to use the contract. Some of you may be importing new students and maybe you're not done setting up. That is, functionally, it's not a problem for those who are all taken care of, but you do want to make sure that all your enrolled students do have households that are tied to logins so that they can complete their contract. So this doesn't have to be 0, but 0 means things are all right. And then you'll get to this part, you'll see more of this as we go, but then we also have what we call payment terms, because the contract is used to generate invoices to kind of determine tuition levels for your students and families. But then because they're invoices, you have to make sure that they choose payment plans, payment terms, payment options, whatever you want to refer to it, as. So you'll need to have those specified within your contract. So it's pretty much telling you for each profile, you have to have the payment term control, and you also have to have the payment terms specified. Last week, Fahad looked at payment terms that you have to create in the system that you then come and tie in the contract. So it's pretty much telling you that, okay, you have your profile, you have your contract, but what are the payment plans? So you need to make sure you specify that, and we'll get to that when we're looking at controls. There's another functionality that you have when you're looking at the profile screen. This is only administrators, by the way. Families, when they come in, they don't even see this top menu. They just see the contract. But as administrator, another thing you're doing on this screen is, say you've gone live with the contract, or maybe not even live. You're just getting ready to test, which we will do ahead in this webinar as well. You can clean up your contract and kind of refresh it, because the contract saves the state that it first loads. So what I mean by that is, if a parent or a household comes in, they log into the contract, they start the contract. The contract loads their options based on the profile they fit in. So 9 to 10, his tuition maybe is 20,000, and 11 to 12, his tuition is 25,000. Maybe I hadn't quite updated my products, which I would have set up before. So I haven't updated my tuition. Instead, last year's tuition was maybe 18,000, and this year it's 20,000. And I forgot, oh no, I forgot to update that. If they've already gone in and started their contract, it's going to remain as 18,000 for as long as I do not clean up their contract. So when I, as administrator, I get wind of, okay, we're not done setting up, we need to roll back some of the contracts because some people have started. I can come here. All I need to have is the student IDs of the records. I can go to campus and get that. As long as I know who it is, I can come back to the system, to the contract system. I come here and I just have to punch in the student ID. In this case, I have whoever it is, and then just do the clean options. If they have submitted the contract already and I need them to redo the whole contract, I will need to clean all three of these items. So just click your clean options, clean files, that's the PDFs that are generated, and clean submit, or the submit on enrolling actions. So it allows them to restart their contract. So those are the functions of the profile screen. So you can break down your contract, into different levels, whether it's tuition-based or whatever fee-based, whatever your breakdown is, and it allows you to kind of see where you are in terms of your filters, your logins, and stuff like that. Then also to reset contracts, because sometimes that people forget to do certain things. And even if it's just a matter of updating, like the text. Maybe on the contract I had written something else in the consent, or do you acknowledge whatever the acknowledgement is. If I make any changes to the contract and people have started, I'll need to clean them up before they can get the correct version of the contract. So that is the purpose of the profile screen. All right, and then the next thing is the sections. In my contract sections, this is kind of self-explanatory term, but it's basically the breakdown of your contract. So you know, people like to see things in order, a nice label for each category, or to know which part they're reading. That's what your sections do, because you can have your profiles, but you need to be able to have sections so that you can add information to each section. It's probably not wise to have just one section, and you don't want to have too many sections at the same time. But you have say you have your paper contract, you want to kind of structure and say, okay, like paragraphs, and then you just label each paragraph and put the information in each respective section. So this is not a hard matter. You just add a new section, type out the name, and then you just create a new section. That's all the screen is for. So it's not too busy. You're not going to spend too much time here. It's just a matter of understanding what you're trying to do, labeling each section accordingly, and then you go through and build in the meat of each section in the next section, which we're going to be looking at, and that is the control section of the contract, right? And as you can see, so you've done your profiles, the breakdown of, okay, I'm going to have 9 to 12, 6 to 8, whatever my breakdown is. I've done my sections. Now, when I come to the control screen, this is pretty much, I think, I could say most of the work you'll be doing here is going to be related to controls. Now, the options section is kind of pretty much a subset of the controls section, because you can only add controls to your profile, to your contract from the controls section, but you can modify the information from both the controls side and the options side. So these two are related, but to start, we'll start with the controls because it's the main section here. You'll notice there's 3 controls here that have to do with creating or adding a new control. The first one looks at what you did before, making sure you have your section in place. I'm going to say, like most schools will have, introduction, just, the first part, not too much going on, just saying this is what we're doing here. And then you From there, it goes in any direction. No two schools will have the same information in my experience. So you've defined your sections. You have to choose which section am I adding a new piece of information to. When you start out, for most of you or anybody who's starting out, these will be empty, but you just have these sections broken down. So for us, we've kind of done this before. We're just kind of refreshing, right? So you can add a control to a section. You can label the control by typing. This is the typing where I just put in a name for the control, and that's what appears in this text box here. It's good to put in the title because you know what you're looking at. Especially the more you build, it starts to help you, because when you're looking here, say these text boxes were empty, you didn't know, okay, this is a control, but I don't know what it's for. If somebody else comes, it's good. Labeling these controls is good, because if somebody else comes in and needs to know what they're looking at, it's a quick way to know what is going on within this control. I can go in and edit it real quick. Functionally, you don't have to put a name, but we, of course, will encourage you to put a name. The third and final drop-down before you actually add the control is what type of control specifically am I dealing with? Okay, because I choose the section, I name it, and then I say, okay, this is going to be a checkbox. Now, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, that is what determines what type of control I want to add. Most categories will at least have a text box. And it kind of labels it here for you, text control. This is just the simplest one where you just type out text for them to see, usually instructional, or it's the actual consent that they have to read and verify. So let me just go through the list here. The checkbox, and I'll click through and show you as I go through. The checkbox is typically used for them to acknowledge something. So I'm looking here at disclosure and consent. I have a checkbox control. It says disclosure and consent. So if I look at that text, it tells me, okay, you are about to complete an enrollment contract and whatnot. It describes a whole bunch of things, but they're not checking off with the text box. This is just for them to read out. And then, so if I want them to acknowledge this process or whatever they've just read, they would add something like a checkbox. And here I have it here right below. And I add it to the same section. I say, I agree to the use, trying to agreement, whatever you put in your checkbox. And then so they check off and say, okay, I support this or I agree to this, so let's go ahead and carry on with this process. That's typically what your checkboxes are used for. And when you add a control, you can type the customized text that goes with it so they can read and it makes sense to why they're checking something off or typing in a certain box. So a checkbox is typically used for them to acknowledge, agree to something within your contracts. You also have radio buttons. Now, radio buttons allow for selection between two options. If they're gonna, let's say I have a radio button here. If I'm gonna add a radio button, I usually am providing more than one option. A checkbox is just going for them to say, okay, I agree to this. But when I add a radio button, for example, I'm saying I can choose, and I can add multiple options to radio. They can say option 1, option 2, and option 3 within the same radio button control. So I don't have one here, but I'm going to add a radio button to one of my sections so you can see how that works. So if I say electronic enrollment and I say radio enrollment, I'm going to enrollment radio, right? And then I pick a radio button and I add a radio button, right? Now it's going to refresh, and then it appears within the section that I chose, and then I can go and modify that enrollment, that control. I say add new option. And whatever my options are, if I say option 1, I type it out, option 1. Let me add my options first. I'm going to say I have 3 selections. I can add all 3 of them first. And because it's all one control, you see how it says I can pick 1, 2, or 3. Then I can say option 1. Option 1, then I can say option 2, all right, and option 3. Option 3. Whatever those options are now, this doesn't have to be tied to any product or anything like that. I'll get to those examples. It's just we're saying we acknowledge option 1, 2, or 3, and then they can save that. And when you're looking at their printed version of their contract, then you can see they chose 1, 2, or 3. Now, I'll have a practical application of that in just a moment, which actually has products with that as well. So a radio button is pretty much, it's just used for them to choose between one of multiple options. So that's what you'd use a radio button for. The next one is a signature. The signature control is typically used at the bottom of a contract. So I'll scroll down to the bottom where we have the terms and conditions. You have a signature control. That way the parent just types in, you know, because this is online, they'll probably have to type in just first name, last, since they can't sign. They just type in their name as an acknowledgement to signature of parent 1 or signature of parent 2. Then they just type in their name. That's what the signature control is used for, to collect signatures. Then there's the common text control. That's just instructional. There's one here right at the top, instructions. If I open that up, it just pulls up text. You know, just say, hey, step 1, step 2, kind of tell them, okay, read through. Whatever instruction you provide is usually unique to each school. So that's just copy paste from wherever you get. If you had a Word document of your previous contract, typically you're just copy pasting that from one place and putting in your text controls. So that's one of the easier ones to work with, you know, to this text. Then the next control in the list is going to be a date stamp. Now, usually in the U.S., when people sign anything, we always want to have a date to go with that. A date control, the date stamp allows you to have a date with your contract. It automatically pulls today's date. So if the parent is doing the contract now, they don't have to type in a date. You'll usually have that along with your signature controls. So here you have a date stamp control. It automatically pulls today's date. When they submit the contract, it just takes the date that they're doing the contract and stores that as your contract submitted date. So you just add that to whatever section typically will be at the bottom of your contract, and it just becomes part of your contract, pulling today's date. And then you also have the financial aid controls. Now, this one is significant if you're a school that handles that. A lot of people around this time of the year, maybe you've not processed all your financial aid, and I hear that quite a bit, but you want to be able to send out the re-enrollment contracts. Now, if the contract amount is supposed to show, you know, your full tuition minus X amount for a financial aid award, you would need to have that financial aid included by the time you send out your contract. It's just a simple control. You don't customize it anyway. You just have to add it to your contract. You'll notice here in my tuition section, I have a financial aid control, but then there's no blue button because I can't edit it. It just pulls the information as I have it in the system. You have to already have your financial aid in the system before you send out your contract if you want to be able to show that we have awarded students so much money and it deducts from their total tuition. Otherwise, it'll just show full tuition and you'd have to kind of process that after the fact. But the control itself, you just take it from the list here, you add it to your section that's relevant, and it just pulls from campus the financial aid section, and it actually deducts from your tuition amounts that you set in your products. All right. Then you have another very important control for your process, and that's the payment options control. The payment options, because you're using the contract to create an invoice, payment options is how you allow them to select their payment plan. I guess that's the more common term. And Fahad talked about it last week, where you go into the finance system, you go under maintenance, you create payment terms where you say they're going to pay over 10 months. You set the due dates, 1st of May, 1st of June, going through every month. If it's a 10-month plan, if it's a 6-month plan, 2-month, 1-month full payment. You set the payment terms, and when you set up the payment terms, then you come into the contract, you create the payment options, and you assign those payment terms to options. So let me open that control here. I've added it to my payment options section. I have the text that describes what's going on there. Payments must be made on time, you know, whatever instructions you include. But then now when I look at my payments options control, now in that control, you'll notice I have the payment term this here. This is the term, this is the what I've set up in campus. So you see the list includes all the payment terms that I would have created in campus, and I can assign here the schedule, and everything is all done in campus. You just have to assign it here, they pick it, and it breaks down their invoice into whatever schedule it is that's associated with the term. So you have to have these in your contract, and notice on the profile screen it said which profiles are missing a payment term. So you have to make sure each profile has this specified. I'm going to close that. Each profile has this specified, and it's tied to active payment terms that are accurately created in your system. So just like the radio button, you notice it has this exact same look and format as a radio button control, where I have options I can pick from. I can only pick one. That's why you use a radio button, because they can only pick one option, and then it breaks down the invoice based on that. I can add new options if I need to. Right now I have a 10-month tuition plan. I have a 2-month, 2-payment option, and then 1 payment, which is pretty much full payment. If I said I now have a 6-month payment plan, all I'd have to do is say add a new option, and then I could pick that option. I don't have a 6-month payment term, so I would not create that. But if that became the case, all I'll have to say is add new option, and it comes down here at the bottom, and I suddenly have a new option. I can add whatever my new payment term is. I pick it, I describe it as I have the others, and that becomes part of my payment options for my families. So I don't have that in this case, so I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to stick with my 3 payment terms. All right, then I have the last 2 are transportation controls. The transportation controls are similar to like, there are other fees you can add on. Not a lot of people use these, but if you have a bus system and you have to have these in campus created as well, where you have transportation, you create your bus routes, your bus schedule and stuff like that, and then parents can sign up for bus programs, and then you can associate fees with that if you needed to. So it's just like adding a fee to your contract. So you'd add a transportation control. When they pick, then they can pick, oh, this is pick this bus that travels this route, and sign up for that. Then you associate the fees with that you need to. But it's not very common, so I won't dwell on that. And I'll deal with what we usually see here. Okay, so that's pretty much the controls that you'll be working with. For like 99% of you, these are the controls you're working with. Now, earlier in the process, we talked about setting up profiles. And the reason you have profiles is because you could possibly have different information required for different levels of applicants. Of students, re-enrolling students or enrolling students. And this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, because within each control, say I'm looking at my introduction. My introduction will typically be information that applies to everybody, regardless of grade level and stuff like that. It's not unique to my PK through 4. It's not unique to my 11 to 12s. So I can type out my text. I can put it all in there. And then there's this nice tool. Because I have all these profiles, do I want to type in this information 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different times? No. This information I can type in just once because it applies to everybody. So when I've added my control and I put my text in, I can use the copy to other profiles function. Of course, I have to save my text first when I see it here. Then I can do copy to other profiles. In so doing, it already spreads out all the information that I have across all my profiles. I don't have to go through and see 7, 8 and make sure I type it in again. I just use the copy of the profiles, and it applies to everybody at the same time. However, there are those instances where I need to kind of specialize my text to a specific grade level, right? I'm going to get rid of those radio buttons because honestly, they didn't really need them for anything. I'll use a real example down the road. Now, if I had a situation where I wanted to make the text or the information unique to a specific grade level, for that purpose, I'm using my profiles become very important, and I want to stay away from this button. The most common reason for this would be like something like tuition. PKs through 4s maybe pay a different tuition from others. From 5 through 6, same thing, 11 through 12. Now my profiles become very important because my tuition next year will be different. So now, just by looking at this, I had done this earlier. If I look at, for example, my 5 through 6, it says just tuition 1718. But when I look at my PK through 4, it says tuition 1718-testing, because this contract will be slightly different for this group. Now, another thing is assigning the tuition to that profile is also very important, because now I'm going to say, okay, in my list of products that, as we saw last week, I have to create all my products for my tuition, my fees, or whatever it is that I will be assessing in my contract or in my system in general. I have to have those products already created in the system so that I can add them to my contract. So what I do, once I have them in the system, I can come and assign them. Now, you can only assign one product per control, so to speak. So when I have my, and it can be to any control, notice that whether it's a text box, whether it's a payment term control, whether it's a radio button, a lot of the controls allow you to assign a product with them. And as many products as you assign in your contract, that becomes the total of your invoice. So I've seen it sometimes in the past where accidentally you assign a product to more than, the tuition product, for example, is assigned to more than one control within one contract. Then you see, oh, my free tuition is doubled up. That's because as long as you've added a product to a control, it becomes part of the invoice total. To do that, you use this drop down here. You find your tuition product that you created. In this case, very easy, my K-12 tuition product. I pick that here. I assign that to my control. Now, I could type in the fees, but then that's unnecessary because if I'm using my product and I add the fee, when I click add fee, it creates that merge type of control, that merge field, and it just pulls the fees as I have specified them within my contract, within my product, excuse me. So I don't need to type in the numbers. Now, there are instances where maybe it's not going to be part of an invoice. You just want them to know that certain things cost this much. Then I could just type and say, oh, this fee is $600. But then if I just type it in and I don't actually assign a product to the control, then I don't get that feeding into my invoice total. So as I was saying, the profiles are very important in this case because for my, say, my 11 through 12, I have a different product. You'll see it's a different product that's specified in this case. So this is when I want to stay away from my copy to others. If I, by some chance, I click copy to other profiles, then all my profiles are going to be using this same tuition product, and suddenly my PK, my Ps through 4s are going to be paying the same tuition amount as my grade 12s, which I probably don't want them to do. All right, so you just want to stay away from that whenever you're dealing with your unique values. And that is the main reason. That is the most important reason to have profiles, because you want to be able to break things down based on different people within your school. All right, so that kind of is, you've assigned your fees, you have your sections, and you've assigned your unique fees, and you've also assigned things that are in general applying to everybody. There's also, I talked about the payment terms, so that's all taken care of. One thing, adding the controls, this applies only to the main body of your contract. There's another part of the contract that you'll need to modify that you don't necessarily control in terms of adding controls or adding terms. That's like the thank you screens or the text that they get on the deposit summary screen. To be able to modify those sections of the contract, you actually have to go through the contract as like you're submitting a contract. I know a lot of people said, how do I test the contract? How do I go through? That process involves you actually tying yourself to a household. We always encourage people to have a test household in the system that they can actually impersonate and go through and do as that person. That way you can get to other screens and update your thank you message, update all that stuff. So you need to be tied to somebody as administrator to make changes on those screens, and I'll get there in just a moment. There's another part of the contracts. Oh, I said, just 1 second, sorry about that. The options, like I said, is a subset of the control screen. Sorry about that, that's gonna load. I'm gonna pause here for a moment. I'm now on the options section. Before I was on the control section. The main difference between the options and the control section is the options section allows you to scroll down and see your contract as you have added your controls to each respective section. The control screen is like a summary, and it allows you to go and modify that individual control for each profile. But the options screen has the entire contract based on the profile. So I can change and toggle through the different profiles and see the contract options or the contract controls and just scroll through and make changes to it as I would on the control screen. But on the options screen, I can't add new controls. I can only work within the ones that I've created from my control screen and just modify them for each unique profile. So it kind of allows you to see, it's a better view, honestly, in terms of having an idea of what to expect. You can work from the options screen. You can easily see which products are assigned to which control, so that you can see, okay, did I duplicate this product somewhere? It's the best way to see that, because the control screen doesn't give you this type of view. So when you want to see, okay, did I duplicate anything? Did I do what? You want to come to the options screen, scroll through, and you'll see modify, make the changes you need, and then you can proceed to the next phase. Okay, so you see these different fees you can assess with different controls. This is just a text box that has a fee with it, just like on the tuition. You have other items here, like for example, when I talked about having other fees in the contract that are not necessarily part of the invoice right now, for whatever reason, that is possible. I have here a mandatory fee of $45 per student. If I don't include that as a product, it will not be part of my invoice. But I could type in the amount, and they can see it and just have it on file that, okay, we have this fee that's coming up, and that's all good. This is a fee. This will be included because it's a product, so it'll be included in my invoice total. So that's the difference between the options and the control screen. The control screen is like the main manager, but you can't really see it. The options screen allows you to see it and edit, but not add anything new. But they serve, for the most part, the same purpose. All right. Another thing not everybody uses, but has proved to be useful for some, is the hold screen. The hold screen is where the contract is driven by actions. So you can create actions, student actions specifically, because it's only used on student records. Applicants have to be enrolled, and then they're able to do the contract. But then everything else is based on your student actions. So holds can be added to your student records if you, for whatever reason, said, okay, our contract's alive, but there's a number of families that haven't paid their tuition, or there's a number of families that we're still working with for whatever reason. The contract hold actions allow you to just put them on hold while not holding back everybody else. So I'll have to, of course, have the actions created in my system first, and I can assign them here. And then when I add the action, I can add a text that applies to that person, so that when they go through, if they have that action, they're like, okay, I can't do this. They get the message that goes with that hold, because if you just apply a hold and there's no message, I guess they would call you anyway. But at least when you have the hold action, if you include the text that kind of informs them, why am I on hold, then that when they call, they're kind of armed, or they prepare their documents, whatever they need to do to get this all taken care of. You can have, we have the most common ones we see are academic holds and financial holds. We just have another hold in here that can be used for whatever reason. All right, and you'd want to add the text that pertains to each type of hold, so you can see how exactly, so that they get the different messages. All right, then there's also the another interesting page or screen that don't usually see a lot of people using all the time, but it's fairly useful, is the override screen. And probably why a lot of people wouldn't use it is because there's a trick to it. Overrides allow you to to force a value, whether it's a tuition amount or a fee amount on records. But the catch is they have to have either started the contract, or you have to load options for them. So when someone starts a contract, they go into the system, they log in, they select their student, and they say go to contract. The system, based on the filters you have built, tries to find out which profile do they fit in. Now, very simply, it could be a grade level thing, or it could be, again, international versus domestic student. Whatever the profiles you have are, it sees they fit in this profile, and then it loads those options for them. My 9th grader's tuition is $20,000, so that's what he's going to get. So you can kind of force that process on this screen, because if they haven't started a contract, then you can't override it unless you do that. So I'm going to take one of my students. This is the student that I'm tied to right now. Then you'll see how it works. I'm going to look for Delarecki Greg. Delarecki should be alphabetical. And I say create options because I'm in the setup phase, or the parent hasn't logged in. I'm going to have to create options for them. So based on all the products I have in the system, or based on all the fees that I've assessed in my contract, it's going to load all those fees here so I can see how that goes. Okay, my tuition for next year is $29,500, but maybe this family, this student, there's something going on, and we don't have a financial aid quite yet, or maybe they don't even have financial aid, but for whatever reason, they got some type of exception, and maybe their fees for next year is going to be $20,000 as opposed to $29,000. We're going to waive the parent association fee. We're going to waive technology fee for whatever reason. Then I save that. When the parents log into the contract to do the contract for Greg, specifically Greg, these are the amounts that they'll get on their page, and that's the amount they'll get on their summary. And I can quickly show you that because I have Greg here, and this will also allow me to give you an example of how the clean contract works. Because I have Greg, I created options for him, and I go and I click select, and I say go to contract. When I go look at Greg's contract, you'll see under the tuition section it says $20,000, whereas it should have said $29,000. I haven't chosen payment term or anything, but then it waives I waive the parent association fee, that's $0. I also waive the technology fee. And it'll reflect when I go do my summary. I'm just going to do my test. I go through, I say continue. That also shows up now. This is what I talked about earlier. It shows that those fees are waived. There's no, you see the technology fee is not there. The fees are $20,000. The deposit stayed the same. I didn't do anything with the deposit. It stayed the same based on the product, but I kind of reduced a lot of the other things that Greg would have paid. Now you can see that will be different if I don't force that. If I just let the system run its course, his fees are behind. I'll give you an example of that in just a moment. But while I'm here, I want to take a moment to show you that when you want, there are other pages besides the options, the standard options and controls that you have control of, that you add and you modify those for yourself. But you also have like the payment and deposit screens, the thank you screen, which has more text that you'll typically want to modify. To be able to do that, like I said, you have to be tied to a test household, or whether it's a real household, whatever you decide. We always encourage to have at least one test household, at least one test student, stuff like that you can play with in any way. So that when you go in, you can make changes and not worry about how it's affecting an actual record. So when you're tied to that household, you go and you do the contract, you come to this screen, because parents will get to the screen. You can now modify the text on this screen. You wouldn't otherwise be able to come to this screen unless if you save the links, the URL possibly, but it's so much easier if you just tie it to a test household. You can come here, modify the text that they'll see when they on this deposit screen, just explain what's going on here below the deposit summary, explain the payment summary, and then have a text that allows them to get to the next section. All of this text you want to come modify as you're going through the process, right? And then, so that's how I was kind of showing you how the overrides work. So we've forced this $20,000 on Greg. Now, if I didn't force that, Greg's tuition would be significantly different. Now, to clean it up, if I say, okay, no, Greg doesn't get an override, I have to come back here. I say clean options. He didn't submit, so I don't have to clean files and clean all this. I just keep it as it is. So when I come back, if I was to load his I hope the button responded. Sometimes you have to click it twice. I think I got it. If I come back, I see now his tuition is $29,500. Now that's what everybody would get without any special treatment. So that's fine. But then you can use the overrides to kind of force a certain tuition amount. That's what it's for. The last part is the integrity screen. Now the integrity screen, if you set up your contract fine, you wouldn't have to worry about that screen. It kind of gives you a summary of the things that could be wrong with your contract if you don't have, say, some payment terms assigned somewhere. If you're using the same action in multiple different applications, like I said earlier, some schools because the contract can only be done by one household. A classic example it would highlight here is if you have a secondary and a primary contract. You'll typically want to have a unique action for each contract. You can't have the same submit action for separate contracts because it mixes them up on the submit screen. They each have to have a unique submit, so you know when you're like looking who has submitted the contract. If they both have the same action, then you won't know who hasn't if the primary and secondary are supposed to submit. All right. And then, so it'll tell you that, oh, you have the same action specified in more than one application, or your people are not fitting in profiles. It kind of gives you a summary of what could be wrong with your contract before you go live. So if you get everything right from here through holds, for example, even not through holds, through options, then you won't have to worry about the screen. Many times we get through it without people ever looking at that screen. So that's how you go. That's what that screen is used for. So now we've gone through, we've seen how the different sections, how you manage and modify and maintain your contract. Now I want to go through an actual test. Now if I wanted to add a new section, if I added, I've gone through, I looked at the contract as Deli Regi, but I want to make a change. So if I come here to controls, I want to add a new, actually want to show you the process of adding a control and adding a fee so you see how it actually works. So if I don't have a section yet that makes sense, I'm going to say, okay, maybe at school we are going to be offering music lessons or something like that at the school next year. Extra music lessons after school as an activity. So I can order that. I put that, say, yeah. Music, I'll put the music lessons. That's going to be one of the things we offer. So I have a new section. When I come to my controls, I'm going to say I'm going to add. I talked about most sections will have a text box that says music instructions. They don't see the label, by the way. This is just so you know what the control is used for. All right, and then I'm going to say this is going to be a text box. I add it to that section. Then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to have them choose which music lessons that they want, whether they want a 45-minute lesson, a 30-minute lesson, whatever it is. So I'm going to have to say music lesson choice, something like that. And then I say radio button, because the radio button allows them to choose options, one or the other kind of thing, right? So I say I'm going to add a radio button. So now, when I come to my music lesson choices, I scroll down. I can come here. I can say, okay, add text to that. Please select one of the options below. All right. And then I just save that. I'm going to copy it to all profiles. So everybody's going to use the same. It's going to be the same for everybody. They can choose a 30-minute, 45-minute. Then I go back to my controls. I go back to my music lessons section. Then I can punch that. Then I'm going to have to add the options. I'm going to have two options, 45-minute lesson or 30-minute lesson, all right? I'm going to say 30-minute lesson. 30-minute lesson. So I would have to have a product. If I'm going to say music private lessons 30 minutes, I have that product associated here, lesson, and then I do a 45-minute lesson. Let's see, 45-minute lesson. All right. Then I pick that as another 45-minute. Then I save that. I have that. I save it. And I have two options. No, there we go. And I copy to others. So now I have a new control that has fees. It's going to add another option to my overrides. So now I've added that. I've updated that. Now I want to test my contract and see, okay, I've made these changes. Now before, an easy way to see who already has option that needs an override is it needs to be cleaned up is to come here. If I've gone in before, Greg is the one who has started the contract. So he has options loaded already. So I'm going to have to clean him if he's to see the new things I just added. So I go in, his ID is 5021. I take him, I clean his options. So now it's just a cheat, a quick way to see who has options. I come here, there's nobody with options, so definitely anybody who starts will see whatever I've just added. So I come here, I say pick Greg. Now at this point I'm testing the contract. I'm going to go through and submit the contract because there's also the campus side of a submitted contract, the PDF, so you want to be able to see all that while you're creating and setting that up. So I say go to contract, I scroll through, I check off, I don't have to do all that. By default, it takes all that. Go through. There's, okay, music lessons. I say, okay, I'm going to want a 45-minute music lesson. There's all these other choices and options. Scroll through, check off, test. All right, and I continue. So it brings me to the screen. If I need to modify anything, I can modify. Now you see there's a music lesson that's been added to my tuition. All right, all these fees minus my deposit brings me to a, my balance due at this point. So I can then say submit. I say submit. Now I'm going to try to do this again without an administrator role. If there's text I need to modify here, I can modify payment type. This is going to be for an e-check. e-check, e-check, e-check below. Then I can say credit card, credit card, and then just say manual manual check, something like that. So if I could do all that. I save. If it redraws, I'm gonna have to type that in. Save. I save that, and I save. So now when they come to the screen, they can choose one of these three options, because on my settings screen, I said they can do e-checks, credit cards, or whatever. I specify that in my settings what options they have. So if they do a check, this means they're not actually going to pay online. That way they can submit the contract. They're not paying now. Then you'd have to work with them to whether they write you a check or they come with a money order, whatever it is. That's done offline. If they choose one of these two, of course you have to have a payment gateway that accepts credit cards or e-checks for them to pay. So if I go through and I say next, the contract is submitted, the thank you screen. I want to modify the thank you screen as well. So I have to be logged in as administrator tied to a test household. Now I can modify my thank you screen to say whatever I needed to say. I can save that. But in this process, I've actually tested to see that, okay, my contract goes through without error as administrator. Then I can print the PDF off. It creates a PDF. I can view that based on everything I've done. And then I can probably go through this process again for different profiles or different students, see how it works. But at this point, I've gone through, I've configured my entire contract. I've tested it as administrator. Many times you want to test it as a parent as well to see how that looks. So I'm going to do just that. When you submit a contract, there's the campus side to deal with as well, right? So now that I've submitted a test app contract, when I come back to campus, all my contracts, this is the admin side, it doesn't come from here. All the contracts that are submitted, we keep track of them on the finance side. So notice I pointed out something, I'll show you something here real quick. When I click on contracts, by default it's empty because I have a contract application for 18-19. So you want to say, okay, I'm actually dealing with 17-18 because that's the contract I'm working with. And my contract that I'm dealing with is the contract webinar, contract submitted webinar, because that's my submit action. What this here is a list of the submit actions tied to my contract that I specify in the settings. So it allows me to choose, okay, for your cases, it'll typically be primary household, secondary household, or primary contract, secondary contract. So you see, I want to see which primary households have submitted the contract. You pick that action. In this case, it's webinar. That's mine, the one I specified. So I only have one person to submit right now. Modified, it says the payment term, the total, and the due. Now this due amount here, excuse me, is the deposit and the amount that they're going to pay based on the payment term, because they didn't pay the deposit right away. So that's why it's so high. But typically, if they pay through the credit card or the e-check, then this amount would be just, the payment due based on, 31,775, or the balance, excuse me, divided by 10. So that's why it's so high, because it's pulling both. And this is how you can review them. Then, of course, is the part where you sign them, and then you can print them off. And then when you click sign, it kind of marks it as signed. If they pay, you'd see the reference number for the receipt, and it would show you the payment method, whether it's e-check or credit card. But since they didn't make a payment, that information is empty. And that's how you would do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to submit this as, kind of give it the view of a normal parent. So I'm going to change the roles on my user real quick so that they can submit. Before I do that, though, I have to clean the contract, because anytime it's submitted, I have to clean it up so that I can do it again, because I'm testing now before I send it out to everybody. All right, I cleaned that. So now that I submit, I have to clean files as well, and I have to clean the submit action so that they can start over. Otherwise, it would not let me do it. So when I come here, he's back to being in progress. So I'm going to change the roles so that we see it as a parent would. Really quickly, one moment. All right. All right, so now this is what your parents will actually see. It's going to look more like this. They're not modifiers, so as a parent, if I'm going to go through, I've made the changes, I can select. If they click, I do not wish to enroll, of course, that adds the not enrolling action, and then nothing happens from there. But then as a parent, they say go to contract. The sections, I've typed out my text, all that's in there. Okay, I check if I agree because I use the checkbox to consent to something. It says the tuition. I can choose a different payment plan, or I can stick to the one, semi-annually, 10-month. 10-month is the common one I see in a lot of places. They check off I agree to the following payment options, say semi-annual payment. There's the class fees, parent association. They opt out of this because you notice before I had that on my contract. So let me say I decide not to do that this year. I'm gonna choose opt out of that. The refund plan. I have a technology fee. What else was this? Road Pike. We'll stay on that. We'll choose the 45-minute course. Well, let's say the 30-minute lessons. They can make a donation, 25. Then I say, okay, fine, I'm ready to submit a contract. Test. All right. You go through, continue. All right, so this is the payment summary. I did not add text in between. I did not add text here in between the two or below the payment summary. So it just shows me the summary. I'm like, okay, fine, submit. Then I have the e-check here, e-check credit card, manual. It kind of has, you see, I have e-check credit card. Oh, I kind of mixed it up, whoopsie. And then I have manual check. The text I typed in, I mixed it up. But then they can choose how to pay. If I choose credit card, of course, it'll force me to pay. Let's see, do I have it configured? I don't have a credit card. I'm not paying $3,000 right now. So, but they can't go back. So I'm just gonna, they won't. If I can go back, I'll just go back. Redraw this. Then I'll choose check instead, and I've submitted. All right. So that's how you test that. You just have to be using a test account. Now, all I did on my case is I removed the roles for the user so they don't see it as a modifier. But in your case, you may have a separate account with a contract test. Usually we have contract setup and contract test tied to the same test household. Contract test is the one that does all the roles to modify. Then contract test just comes in and sees it as a parent would. Now they can print, even parents get to print the form. They can see what they did, scroll through. It's just a replica of what they just went through. You can easily see what they did. They can see what they did because you have this, they have this. Some schools opt to have the pass through the forms. That's another conversation altogether, but then this takes them to the enrollment form, summer forms, whatever you want to call it, which is a possibility in the contract. Many times, now, here's a classic example. Many times you want them to be able to go back to the forms, to the contract login page or the contract homepage, because they may have more than one student. In this case, like if I look through here, I'm stuck here because there's no link or there's no way to go back. So many schools will have a hyperlink that allows the parents to go back to the home page. Otherwise, they just have a print. There's no other link. So if I turn back my modifier roles, and I say here, let's see, did I save that? I'm gonna see if I control F5. There you go. I'll modify again. I'll want to bring this link here. All right. If I take this URL here, I'm gonna take that. Notice when it's submitted, it says submit. When I click select, it doesn't. When I say go to contract, it brings me back to the thank you page. So I want to add a return to home page on this screen. Home. However you type that, I say hyperlink, and I make that. All right, and I say, okay, that should work. And I save that. Make sure I save that. Okay, so now I've made a way for them to get back home. If I click that, let's see if I'll have to click it here. Sorry, it takes me back to the home page. So if I turn off my roles again as a parent. I'm viewing it here. Greg has submitted. I want to go back and print his document. It takes me there. Now I can come back home and pick my second student and go through the contract for them. So you want to and that's why you want to go through as a modifier and make the changes on those screens, so you can, as you're testing, like, let's kind of add this, or let's put that back, and that's how that works. But that's the contract, parent-facing side of the contract. A quick run through. It could go on for a while. A lot of people have custom settings that we did talk to account consultant. They kind of help you do things that are unique to you. But overall, that is how it works for everybody. Any questions you may have, please let us know. You can email them support and stuff like support or your account consultant. They can help you with that. But this is the webinar. We'll post it online. Thank you for your time. If it was a little too fast, sorry about that. But we'll post it so you can watch it at your own pace and at your own speed and kind of review the settings of each contract control. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye.